The history of animation is filled with as many stories of success as tales of failure, as many moments of innovation as there are studio heads stifling the artistry of those beneath them. But no story is as strange, frustrating, and filled with setbacks as that of Richard Williams' The Thief and the Cobbler. Over the course of 30 years, Williams, a Canadian animator who worked on films including Who Framed Roger Rabbit, would attempt to bring his animated story of a plucky cobbler named Tack, a princess named Yum Yum, and their quest to save the Golden City to the big screen. But by the time The Thief and the Cobbler finally premiered, Williams had been kicked off the project and the finished film had been massively changed to suit the demands of several different studios. Today, multiple versions of the film exist under the titles of The Princess and the Cobbler, Arabian Nights, and, of course, The Thief and the Cobbler. But despite many different attempts to restore Williams' original vision, only work prints and fan edits have been able to give viewers a sense of what might have been, with the creator passing away without his dream project ever truly completed. This is the story of The Thief and the Cobbler, an animated tragedy 30 years in the making. On August 16, 2019, animator Richard Williams passed away at the age of 86. Over the course of his career, Williams had gained recognition and success in the animation field thanks to a series of medium-defining moments, including winning the Academy Award for Best Animated Short for his adaptation of A Christmas Carol in 1971, and becoming the animation director for Who Framed Roger Rabbit, creating a blend of live action and animation that surpassed anything attempted in the medium before. But behind it all, Williams had been in the midst of a decades-long struggle to bring his greatest dream to life. A dream that would be taken away from him just before it was finally complete. At the beginning of the 1960s, the animator founded Richard Williams Animation Limited, his own studio to help him and a small team create various shorts and commercials. But its defining focus was a full-length animated feature inspired by the Arabian folktales of the 1001 Nights. Production began in earnest in 1964 on the film that would mostly come to be called The Thief and the Cobbler. And while the studio and Williams himself would take on various projects in the years to come, they would return again and again to The Thief, attempting to make the most elaborate and show-stopping exhibition of the power of animation ever seen. The story of the film that would eventually hit theaters, even in all its different permutations, is a relatively simple tale of saving the kingdom and saving the day. In any version, our story centers on the magnificent Arabian Golden City, ruled by King Nod, who has a daughter, Princess Yum Yum, and is advised by Zigzag the Grand Vizier. However, the city is threatened by the coming army of the One-Eyes, which coincides with the theft of the city's 3 golden balls, a fulfillment of the prophecy that the city would fall if they were ever taken. And this aligns with the arrival of our 2 mute central characters, the heroic cobbler known as Tack, and the kleptomaniac thief known as the Thief. Of course, the Grand Vizier is not so secretly evil and aligns with the One-Eyes, while Tack is prophesied to save the kingdom and sparks a romance with Yum Yum. Pretty simple, but the entire point of The Thief and the Cobbler, and the reason the film took forever to make and has left an impression on fans despite its many compromised versions, is that the entire thing from top to bottom is a work of startling, incredible animation. Williams' interest in the 1001 Nights, and specifically the stories surrounding Mullah Nasruddin, led him to collaborating with author Idris Shah on the book The Exploits of the Incomparable Mullah Nasruddin, contributing illustrations to the original edition of the publication. The animator's interest in Middle Eastern culture and stories would inform everything about the focus and plot of Thief and the Cobbler, with Shah's brother, Omar Ali Shah, a Sufi teacher and writer, helping to produce the film during part of its very long development. Over the next decades, Williams and various collaborators began to animate a movie first called The Amazing Nasruddin, then The Golden City, then The Thief Who Never Gave Up, and then Once, with budget troubles causing many stops and starts. Essentially, a commercial would finance the studio for a bit, the team would animate as much as they could, and then be forced to stop and work for more financing again. Repeat cycle endlessly. It was around this time the dialogue was finally recorded for the film, with Vincent Price voicing Zigzag, Donald Pleasance as Fido, and Anthony Quayle as King Nod, among others. Of these major speaking roles, only Price's voice would remain in all subsequent versions, with the lines recorded 20 years before his death in 1993, but the first version coming out a year after. The first of many setbacks came in 1972, as Williams struck a financing deal with Paramount, only for Idris Shah's sister, who translated the Nasruddin folktales, to claim she owned the stories being used for the film. The controversy caused Paramount to back out, and Williams to start the movie over from scratch, dropping everything related to Nasruddin and the Shahs, and writing a new script with his then-wife Margaret French, now called The Thief and the Cobbler. In 1978, Saudi Arabian Prince Mohammed Faisal agreed to finance test footage for the film, but the promised $100,000 ballooned to $250,000 after many missed deadlines and the resulting sequence, while impressive, taking so long that Faisal left the production in 1980. In between making commercials, Williams continued to work on The Thief, with producer Gary Kurtz giving him money for the production and showing a 12-minute sample reel to Robert Zemeckis in 1984. Zemeckis was so impressed that he hired Williams to work on the upcoming Roger Rabbit. The next 4 years were consumed by work on the ambitious Roger Rabbit, but the result was so impressive that Warner Brothers agreed to pick up this seemingly mythic piece of animation from Williams in 1988, giving the creator the chance to finally finish The Thief and the Cobbler. Well, cut to another 4 years later, and not only is the film still not done, but Disney is about to release their own Arabic folklore-inspired animated movie, Aladdin. And Warner Brothers, realizing that they'll be competing against the House of Mouse with an unfinished and far-behind film, backed out of making The Thief and the Cobbler. Did the Aladdin team rip off Williams' film? There's no definitive proof, but with Thief and the Cobbler being worked on and well-known throughout the industry for decades, there were no real secrets about the elements of the movie. And its core concepts of a lowly hero, a thief, a princess in need of rescue, and a backstabbing advisor to the king are all part of Aladdin, although these are also shared with many other pieces of folklore. With only 15 minutes of film left to finish, Williams and his financiers defaulted on their backing from the Completion Bond Company, which had helped to pay for the movie and, in the event that something went wrong, would gain the rights, taking over production in June of 1992 and firing Williams alongside the entire team. Almost 30 years after starting work on his opus, Williams had lost everything. But before we get to what would become The Princess and the Cobbler, let's dig into Williams' work on the project, and what went both right and horribly wrong. Williams was inspired to go into animation when he first saw Snow White at the age of 5, and fully pushed into art as a career when viewing Rembrandt paintings at the age of 16. These elements of style blend with the signature flat, exaggerated work of UPA animation, famous for Gerald McBoing Boing and Mr. Magoo, to create the look of Thief and the Cobbler. The result is a film that blends flatly colored characters with highly exaggerated but instantly recognizable figure work that moves across intricate backgrounds that defy a naturalistic depth of field. Complex, constantly moving checkerboard floors and massive buildings seem to stretch on for miles as our characters race across them, with the camera zooming around, constantly changing depth of field. Moments like the film's explosive finale incorporate spinning geometric shapes all done by hand, yet emulating the three-dimensional work that would be common and much easier to replicate in CGI decades later. Many of the film's scenes were pieced together over years of stop-and-start work, with each shot the product of its own mini inspiration. Do these scenes go on for too long sometimes? Yes. Does the story play a distant second fiddle to the animation? Absolutely. Is it captivating and almost shocking in how insane this animation is? Definitely. There are inspired, mad choices made all across the film, like giving Zigzag extra fingers with extra knuckles on each covered in a shiny ring. The difficulty of it all essentially the point of creating it. Williams was an ultra-demanding director, firing hundreds of people over the decades, and not just painstakingly planning out highly complex pieces of animation that were often illustrated on the ones, meaning a new drawing for every individual frame, totaling 24 frames and 24 drawings per second of film, but also illustrating large portions himself. For decades, Williams worked without a complete script and without storyboards, instead using massive amounts of pencil tests as a rough approximation of the movie, and maintaining the direction for the film entirely in his head, constantly reworking his vision and redoing finished scenes. But Williams himself was still learning on the job, in particular citing Disney's The Jungle Book as a revelation of how little he knew about feature film animation. Over the years, Williams would bring animation legends into the studio to help grow his skills and support the team, including Art Babbitt, highly influential in the early years of Disney, Ken Harris, Looney Tunes animator whose work included maybe the best short ever, What's Opera Doc, and Emery Hawkins, who worked on everything from Daffy Duck to Woody Woodpecker. Williams likened himself to Rembrandt, creating paintings for the sake of wanting to make something beautiful to the best of his skills. There was no room for commerce, no thought of the audience that would pay money, or the studio that financed all those years of hard work. The thing with The Thief that I'm just trying to do is what they call a masterpiece. When you master a medium, said Williams. In the old days, when you're a master painter, then you did your masterpiece. I've mastered this medium at last, and I'm gonna do a masterpiece, I hope, if I can ever finish the thing. It's not an obsession. I'm just a throwback to an old craftsman who wants to make a pot right or a painting right. You can see Williams and company constantly experimenting with form and structure, especially in the work print and recobbled versions of the film. Some scenes go on way longer than you would ever expect, and without storyboards or a complete script, the studio could indulge in every idea they had. Pacing, story, and audience be damned. Of course, when the film was taken away from Williams, these scenes were edited way down to create a more functional, mainstream film. But that was never really the point of The Thief and the Cobbler. Collaborator and producer Lena Tabori would later describe the film and its relationship to Williams as so special because it was his. It was his heart. It was his soul. It was everything he was, this film. It was his fantasy, all his desire. All his manipulations of how he led his life were there. Everything was in that movie. That movie was about Richard. That film was Richard. The Thief and the Cobbler is Williams' ultimate artistic expression. Even from the start, there was no real unifying commercial vision for the project, and as time and challenges mounted, there was even less regard for the end result. And while the studio won many awards for their commercials and designs, which are brilliant in and of themselves, their inherent commercialism contrasts hard against the spiraling, never-ending art project that became a lost movie. Williams' animation process has been described by fellow animators as Rube Goldbergian due to the massive amount of moving parts and uncoordinated approach to putting a scene together. That, of course, means that the massive delays in making the film aren't all that surprising, but it also meant that the creative process was wholly unique and totally unreplicable. Rube Goldbergian is also how I describe The Thief and the Cobbler's finale, as Tak brings down the entire One-Eye Army and their gigantic war machine with a single shot. And as everything breaks, our thief silently, doggedly moves his way through the red-hot collapsing machinery to get the gold balls. It's chopped down for time in the theatrical releases, but its very long original animation is intact within the recobbled cut. And it's a sight to behold. So intricate, strange, visually compelling, and endlessly inventive to the point of near exhaustion. 30 years is a massive amount of time for a production, the longest for any animated feature in history, but it's an even more massive scope when seen in the context of animation's evolution. Here are some of the major developments that happened in animation between The Thief and the Cobbler's start in 1964 and its final release in 1994. A Charlie Brown Christmas first airs in 1965. Walt Disney passes away in 1966. Disney's Dark Age begins with the Aristocats in 1970. Ralph Bakshi's Fritz the Cat gets an X rating in 1972. Don Bluth Productions is founded in 1979. Heavy Metal is released in 1981. Studio Ghibli is founded in 1985. Dragon Ball debuts and Pixar is founded in 1986. Akira is released in 1988. The Disney Renaissance begins in 1989 with The Little Mermaid. DreamWorks Animation and Cartoon Network are founded in 1994. Don Bluth Productions closes in 1995. And shortly after Arabian Nights' release, Toy Story debuts. When the Completion Bond Company took the film away from Williams, they quickly went to work on not just finishing the movie, but trying to make it much more commercially friendly. Animation director Fred Calvert was quickly brought on board, and multiple studios around the world finished the animation, including Don Bluth's Sullivan Bluth Studios. The film had several finished sequences edited down, more dialogue was added, including for the mostly mute Tak, and 4 Disney-esque songs were written to fit into the musical-heavy trend the Disney Renaissance had brought back in a big way. The resulting film is softer, friendlier, and comes off as a Disney ripoff.
Tak. I'm Tak.
And the additional sequences, while retaining Williams' character models, are very easy to spot as fill-in work, with these lacking the same elaborate staging and unconventional movement as the rest. Instead, these new scenes are very simplistically blocked and animated on the 2s instead of the 1s. "I really didn't want to do it," said Calvert, "but if I didn't do it, it would have been given off to the lowest bidder. I took it as a way to try and preserve something, and at least get the thing on the screen and let it be seen." Calvert's Princess and the Cobbler does have one distinct advantage over Williams' original: a pop version of Am I Feeling Love played over the end credits. Listen, every movie should have a pop version of their lead single played over the end credits. Beauty and the Beast by Peabo Bryson and Celine Dion? Banger. Somewhere Out There by Linda Ronstadt and James Ingram? Banger. A Whole New World by Peabo Bryson and Regina Bell? Banger. Oblivion by M83 and Suzanne Sunfior? Banger. Look, I know that one doesn't really fit in here, but I just wanted to mention that song because it rules and I don't really know where else I would talk about it. Anyway, now completed, whether Williams liked it or not, the film was finally released on September 23, 1993, under Allied Filmmakers and Majestic Films in South Africa and Australia, and later in the Philippines. Not exactly booming markets. As a result, the initial release was seen by about as many people as all those supernatural Breaking Benjamin AMVs I made back in 2009. But the film didn't have a North American release yet. Enter Miramax and the Weinsteins. If you know much about the Weinstein strategy for US distribution of films made outside their studio, you'll know their favorite thing to do is to give them the chop, with Harvey Weinstein in particular often thinking he knew better than the filmmakers and entire studios that made the dang thing in the first place. Miramax had specifically acquired the completed The Princess and the Cobbler, starting off with something already more mainstream and marketable. From there, Miramax cut another 8 minutes off the movie, and added celebrity voices including Matthew Broderick as a now pretty chatty Tack, and Jonathan Winters as the thief, who now motormouth narrates his previously silent escapades. The result was the now named Arabian Nights, easily the most conventional and kid-friendly version of the film by far. Clearly, Miramax was hoping for their first animated hit, and when Arabian Night was released on August 25, 1995, it made $319,000 on 500 screens. That's about as many people that saw all those Naruto Killswitch Engage AMVs I made back in 2006. Pretty bad when taken on its own. Even worse when seen in the context of the 30 years and $24 million it took to bring the movie to the big screen. In the years that followed, both the Allied Filmmakers and Miramax versions were released to home video, including the ultimate indignity of its first ever DVD being packaged as a free giveaway in a box of Fruit Loops. As for Williams himself, the disaster forced Richard Williams Animated Limited to close, and essentially shut the creator out of any major production again for the rest of his life. The Thief and the Cobbler was radioactive, and Williams was the Marie Curie of hand-drawn animation. But that's not to say that he wasn't still influential. Williams hosted animation masterclasses, went on to create the acclaimed instructional book The Animator's Survival Kit, and was taken on by Aardman Animations as their artist-in-residence. And for several decades, Williams essentially refused to talk about The Thief and the Cobbler, wanting to move on from his most painful struggle. Williams also went on to make the animated shorts Circus Drawings and Prologue, the latter of which he intended to be the beginning of a feature-length adaptation of the Greek comedy Lysistrata, which he cheekily titled, I Hope I Live to Finish This. Williams would live long enough to see the work print of The Thief and the Cobbler screen in theaters, helping to begin the reclamation of his lost film, but wouldn't finish Lysistrata, leaving behind one last, incomplete, unrealistically ambitious work for his fans to ponder. Today, every version of The Thief and the Cobbler is easily available to watch online. There is currently no Blu-ray or 4K disc available of the film, and the version available to rent online is the Miramax Arabian Night version. Given how many ways the film has been chopped up and passed around, I doubt many studios are interested in putting the time and effort needed to create a good-looking transfer of a movie that has no real built-in audience. Fan support, however, is a completely different story. For a decade and a half, Garrett Gilchrist and various fans have worked to create what is known as the Recobbled Cut, which pieces together elements of the work prints, early versions of the film, the Princess version, and the Arabian Night version to restore Williams' vision before it was taken away from him. Much of the footage you've seen in this video comes from the Recobbled Cuts, with 4 editions complete, each trying to improve on the quality and totality of the one that came before, and a 5th version in progress and floating around the internet. In the end, I find the creation and fate of The Thief and the Cobbler to be the ultimate example of the inherent incompatibility of art and commerce. Richard Williams' film was made to let the creator and his team indulge in an uncompromised vision of animation without any real notion of how the film would ultimately be released and make a profit. But any feature film, especially one so complicated, needs financing to be made. And when it was time to put up or shut up, Williams lost his dream project to fulfill the financial debts it had incurred. And even then, there was no real way forward to profitability for a film that wasn't made for a mass audience, even with the many cuts and marketable additions made by multiple studios. Still, every version of Williams' film has its devoted fans, each group gravitating toward the art, comedy, or music at the center of the many different cuts, all united by a bold, totally unique vision that still inspires fans to restore an incomplete masterpiece. It's a tough game, Williams said about making movies. If you want to do this stuff with what's going and what's in fashion and you're willing to serve, they'll treat you with red carpets. You have to serve the machine. And I never could. Thanks for watching today's video, and I've returned once again to not just animated movies, but behind-the-scenes disasters. Two great tastes that taste great together. The Thief and the Cobbler is such a fascinating and obscure work, but it does have this growing and strange online reputation, especially with the continued creation of the recobbled cuts. And it's a film that I've known about for a long time, but had never really delved into before watching and rewatching again and researching for this video. And watching every version of the movie, and learning about so much of the behind-the-scenes details, was a real revelation for me, helping me to not just understand the original vision that Williams had, but the ways in which that was slowly compromised over time with so many different cuts. Of course, a completed version will never be available, but I would absolutely love some sort of official, high-quality Blu-ray or 4K to finally come out of this film, because it has essentially really been abandoned by everybody but the fans. I don't think that The Thief and the Cobbler, even the latest recobbled cut, is a perfect movie. There are a lot of issues with it, and it's a movie that you can see just totally getting away from its creators in every scene that was made. But it is fascinating and beautiful, and the hard work there is so evident in every scene. And I actually don't hate the Princess and the Cobbler and Arabian Night versions of the movie. They're much more commercial and mainstream, but they're fun in that mainstream, kid-friendly 90s way. And I know that each version has its own many different fans. Still, if this is the first time that you've heard about this movie, I would advise you to go watch the recobbled cut, at least Mark IV, and maybe Mark V. They are out there and easily available to find, because they provide the most complete version of Williams' original vision. And after all that time and all that work, it's just a tragedy that it really never got to be seen by all that many people. I'd love to hear your thoughts on The Thief and the Cobbler. Which version is your favorite, other unfinished creations that you'd like for me to cover on the channel, and other animated topics as well. As always, a huge thank you to my patrons for their continued support. And if you'd like to be a patron, it's only $1 a month for early access to every video and exclusive Patreon-only podcast reviews. So until next time, I hope that you're taking care of yourselves and appreciating some great artists.